Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good. So, we have about 30 minutes for discussion with our artists. This is happening in the context of an academic research project that's funded by the European Research Council, I should say this. So that's why our artists have been slightly uncomfortably bundled together under this concept of artificial intelligence. And as we saw, all the artists are doing very different things. So I thought a good place to start would just be to kind of dig into what actually the artists are doing, so that we can perhaps move forward to this question of what might be intelligent about these systems. So we'll start first with Alice and Chris and Ollie, who are dispersed around me. Tell us about what are you building in there? Tell us about your system.
So, if you've got time, you're welcome to come and have a go. These are feedback cellos. So it's off at the moment. So it's not feedback. So it's like, it looks like a cello, but it's sort of the opposite of a cello. So normally when you play the cello, you kind of inject energy into the strings with your bow, and that vibrates, and the vibrations go down through the bridge, and the whole body moves, and the sound comes up front. With these, they've got pickups. They're just like a kind of guitar pickup with the strings, and they've got a speaker built into the back. So it's a bit of a massacre of the cello with the jigsaw, cut a hole in it and bolt the speaker in. So what happens is, like Jimi Hendrix style, you get feedback, but rather than Jimi Hendrix style guitar, where you've just got 4 pickups and 1 amp and 1 gain knob and maybe a tone knob, here you've got separate, you can control the gain separately. So we've got this feedback system, and then what we're also doing is my output gets plugged into Chris's cello and vice versa. And I'll leave Ollie to talk about what he's doing. So actually, in this system, we have had some like neural networks and what we might nowadays call artificial intelligence with a sort of learning system. In fact, this was really purist. So I studied evolutionary and adaptive systems a long time ago, and I'm pretty committed to the idea that feedback is like the sort of basis of all adaptive behaviour, which is fundamental to any intelligence, which I'd include like plant intelligence and like planetary intelligence and stuff. So yeah, this was actually quite purist, and it doesn't have any, my system in particular doesn't have any algorithms in the digital. There's no computation anyway. So I'll pass it to Chris.
Yeah, this one is kind of similar to Alice's, except it goes through a computer. Turn it on, it kind of does that. And the idea is that you damp the strings or stimulate the strings, and it controls the energy going through the instrument, and you shape how it sounds, or you try and see what happens. But yeah, we're exploring this concept of shared instruments at the moment, and so we've got our sound. Alice and I are playing different aspects of the same instrument because we're cycling our sound through each other. And so every time I do something, it sounds in her speaker and resonates her strings, and also the signals going to Ollie and his algorithms on his laptop, and then vice versa. So we kind of get this kind of push-pull between all of the instruments, and we're exploring that. Thanks, Ollie.
Am I on? Yeah. I also studied with Alice many years ago, and so we come from a very similar background of being interested in not so much artificial intelligence, but cybernetics and complex adaptive systems and adaptive behaviour. And all the way back then, I got very interested in, we both did actually, in types of neural network which you don't train by learning, which is what all of the buzzy AI is all about now, deep learning, machine learning. You develop its behaviour through a simulated version of Darwinian evolution, and there's a lot of different tricks to do that. So very similar. This is not like systems trained on a large corpus of data. It's systems that are evolved to satisfy certain criteria. So this is actually work with a PhD student. He more recently developed that work I did many years ago and made it into this beautiful plugin that works with Ableton Live, the performance software. And it interfaces with a website, and on that website he's done this kind of process of batch evolving, like creating massive populations of different behaviours that satisfy different criteria. And more recently he's used a process which is known as novelty search. And that's like a variant on evolution. So in the computing sense, evolution is typically used as a technique to optimize some behavior, like getting a robot to walk without falling over. Whereas novelty search is this quite interesting variant of that, when you're not trying to optimize a specific behavior, you're trying to explore all of the diversity within a set of metrics. So you could choose, we just kind of choose these things like mathematical functions like variance and complexity measures and so on. And we sort of evolve this massive population, which is kind of selected based on how much it creates diversity within that space. And then I can select those from this website, download them into the software, and then they also, the networks naturally have an input so they can respond to any signal. So then I've just kind of interloped into this duo, which has been spending many months or years perfecting the art of feeding back on each other, finding these sweet spots, and yeah, three's a crowd, right? Like I've come along and interjected another noise into this feedback cycle. But it kind of, there have been some moments in this performance where it really did feel like the thing of the systems are kind of hitting sweet spots and responding to each other.
So we've got cybernetics and complex systems in the mix. Anna, you're working with live coding. Can you tell us a bit about the system that you're kind of building as we're watching?
Yes, thanks. So, well, altogether I'm using Super Collider, which is this like environment for live coding, but also algorithmic music composition. And so then it allows you to create DIY tools, if you like. So on top of that, I've been using on the one hand one system bespoke system called Milka that I'm still developing, and that builds on top of the Freesound Quark, which means that you can gather sounds from the Freesound database, which is this web database that has a range of different sound samples, and you can query them by descriptors or by tag, by words. And so the idea is with the Milka that you can download these sounds in real time, and the kind of the intelligent part of the the smart part is that you can there is a neural network that is based on a binary classifier, and then it predicts only good sounds that I've been training good sounds based on the timbre characteristics. So then the idea is when you get these sounds from this cloud, you get sounds that you've been training as, and then the system predicts as good sounds. So this is one part. But then I've been combining today the crowdsourced sounds, because these sounds come from people from all over the world, with personal sounds that I've been recording. And then there was the rhythmic box that basically I've been using also like a K-means algorithm that prior to the concert, the idea was to cluster the sounds also based on their timbre or timbrical characteristics, and then group them. Just to say, the tool for this machine learning parts is Fluid Corpus Manipulation Toolkit, developed by Owen, Owen, and Gerard. And so, this tool is very useful for using the kind of machine learning algorithms. The additional part is the live kind of setup with a contact mic and a little box, and that's what I've been using. Yes, the fourth box is based on machine listening as well, and that was a combination using also tools you have in SuperCollider that listen to the sounds that you're producing in real time, and then you can map certain characteristics such as onsets or other characteristics to synthesizers or other sounds. So it has been a little bit of a combination of these different techniques.
Thank you. Well, we've already had the fluid, well, I'll call it FluComa, you can give me the full acronym, introduced. So Pierre and Owen, tell us all about what you were doing.
Okay, what do you call me? None. Okay. Yeah, so you've been introduced to FluComa. The idea was to, over 5 years, empower musicians, creative coder with the technology that were sold as potent yet problematic metaphors, like machine listening, artificial intelligence. I don't know if it's artificially intelligent, but I know it's naturally dumb. A computer is definitely a fast idiot, and it will not give you anything you haven't asked for. It doesn't mean that you know what you've asked for, and therefore we, in this set, have a certain amount of control on our instrument, which we've practiced, and there's some games of life and kind of simple things, but there's also an antagonist to us, which is a kind of Frankenstein that Owen has built, which we'll tell you about. But so Owen and I are both playing our instrument, which we practice hard to master, but we're playing with and against a certain technology. N'est-ce pas, my dear?
Oui. Yeah, so I have commitment issues, so I don't like the idea that I have an instrument so much as something that's shifting and bubbling underneath me and fighting back. So the thing that sits between me and Pierre and throws us off kilter is a sort of very deliberately artificial village idiot that I wrote, where similar to the stuff that Alice and Chris and Ollie have all said about being more interested in algorithms that are adapting, I've unpacked stuff that you normally have to pre-train, and this thing is trying to make a model of music from scratch, just from its inputs and a few completely unprincipled feedback loops every time you start. So it starts off knowing nothing, and it doesn't actually know much more by the time you get to the end. It's kind of the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. It's decided it knows enough to start making musical gestures, so very deliberately made the worst improviser you've ever played with. You have to sort of work around it.
I'm sure it's not true. I've played with much worse. Yeah, there are also these kind of various levels of feedback and machine learning happening, but inverted comma machine learning, which is great to fight back. Because how you model the listening, how you model the learning process, what it gives you back, and how you react as a musician and feeding back into that system is a very dynamic thing. And we're very anti-Google on that respect, in the sense that we try to be transparent and challenge those assumptions in creative ways. And playful, hopefully, if slightly noisy.
I mean, one of the possibly cross-cutting themes is coming up is this idea of agency. And what I was thinking while watching your performances is, I mean, there's a way of talking in quite an idealised and romanticised way about instruments where you sort of lose the boundary between yourself and the instrument or yourself and the other performer, like in terms of flow states and things that improvisers might often talk about. But in different ways, you're all sort of bringing different dynamics out of that possible confusion of agency or loss of control. And would anyone like to talk about that as a potentially fertile area that these systems bring into play?
Me too.
Go for it.
Yeah, so there's this thing, if you take the laptop on stage, at one extreme you could just press space and get on with doom scrolling Twitter, which is sort of what everyone assumes you're doing, right? And at the other extreme, you could go for this kind of 19th century athleticism, where it's all about micro-virtuosity and what have you. But at least for me, the interesting bit is wandering between those kind of ideas. And I quite like it if not only the audience is getting confused about who's doing what, but if we're getting confused about who's doing what, because it means that you're actually shifting yourself into thinking differently about what it is that you're doing on stage and why you've made these poor people come out on a rainy afternoon to watch it happen. And if you are going to bother like burning coal and all the rest of it to make all this happen, then I think it's worth nudging it a bit, right? Otherwise you can just press space and stay happy.
If I may agree and disagree with my beautiful colleague, it's been 5.5 years of these beautiful disagreement in the lab, you can imagine. I kind of agree with this idea, but I disagree. I like control, obviously. I'm a musician, a control freak, I practice. But at the same time, a good improviser, when I play with a good improviser, the music goes elsewhere than I would do by myself. Otherwise, why would I bother? I can stay in my studio and do everything myself. So this idea of a counter agent is really important. Now, how it's coded is far from either trivial, neutral, or anything like. That's why these metaphors of artificial, it's baked in, deferred, somehow algorithmic thinking. That's not artificial intelligence. You can use that metaphor if you want. So I agree with Owen in the fact that it needs to be worthy of something. But there's something about the flow state you talked about, which people imagine flow state as the thing where magic happens, which is true, but it's definitely not the kind of patriarchal, God-given idea that is seeded, and then my fingers and body disappear and I send the music to your soul directly. This is wrong. Like flow state can be intense concentration with, like you saw me play. Some musicians cannot look at me play because I'm too busy. But I don't think about these gestures. I listen. The machine is throwing me, or Owen, or both, are throwing me they poke at me, then it sends the music elsewhere. And I have a sense of form that this system doesn't have. And I'm trying to make a piece of music, and sometimes my vision is different to Owen's and to the machine. So there's all of that thing can induce a type of flow state, which is really multidimensional and complex and move between attention, priorities, yet I forgot about you guys. I was completely in flow state, but it doesn't mean I was just, Sometimes that happens too, but it's part of the game. I've spoken enough.
I think I'll add as well, yeah, so I guess I've consciously moved right back away from computery things, and there's the flow, I guess in that sort of yogi sense of instability, of like, rather than the flow of like, I've completely mastered my cello and I'm going to play perfectly in tune, and then, above that, like I grew up playing classical music where you've got to get, the intonation and the rhythm exactly right before you can sort of start making music, and this is like the opposite, right, because I often don't really know quite what's going to happen. And not exactly, it's still a cello, but when we plug these things into each other, there's this sort of, there's this sort of no priors thing going on. You can't come to it with a plan, if you like. So you're in the flow in that sense of like, always listening, responding, always seeing what's going to happen next. And there's something quite lovely then about this sort of having a shared instrument, because you're then also, I suppose in a simple sense, it's against that sort of 19th century I am me and I will control my instrument. You're instantly, recognising that actually the best stuff happens when you let the thing be, if you like, and kind of listen to what's emerging, and then you kind of go from there, I suppose. So it can, becomes a bit sort of Buddhist, I suppose, in that like you recognise that you're all interconnected now, but you have to, but in quite a real sense, right? And then even mathematically, I quite like switching between these sort of very, very intuitive ways of knowing and thinking and being, but then also even like formally, once you set up this feedback loop, this thing is like self-resonating. So the sort of like mathematical definitions of autonomy and self-determination is that like the future of a system is not completely determined by its environment, right? Which is normally a cello, it's the future vibrations of the cello are completely determined by the player, but in this sense, the cello in a very real sense is determining the future. So in a very real sort of actual sense, it's sort of self-determined, and you then can only make music if you sort of hop on that ride with it and kind of go with that. So it's that flow in terms of a kind of entering into that sort of playing with another in a very real sense.
I think I really like giving up control to the instrument, and when we're making music with computers, there's often a lot of kind of control. There's a feedback loop going on anyway, but it was kind of in a slightly different non-musical time zone. And computers kind of how can I put it? It can be very unmusical, I guess. But when we put things in a feedback instrument, we get to engage with the computer, well, for me anyway, in a kind of more musical zone. So it seems to kind of level things out. But I think it's really nice to have the instrument has some agency, and you can kind of have a push-pull with the instrument in a very kind of natural, more embodied way, and it surprises you. There's serendipity involved, and maybe that happens in feedback music, and it happens in AI models a lot as well. But they give something back to you, and you kind of explore and share space together.
I mean, Anna, in terms of, sorry, Ollie, did you want to jump in? Yeah. In terms of picking up some of these things with regards to what you're doing with the Milker software, it's like one kind of precursor that sprang to mind for me was the kind of in 60s experimental music, the use of the radio and AMM, Kiefer playing on stage and just introducing the radio as a sort of ambient sound, unpredictable sound from outside the performance situation. There's a similarity, I suppose, with using free sound, but you're also, in a sense, injecting more control into that kind of situation. If you're telling this thing to listen to sounds that that are in your aesthetic kind of world, would that be a kind of something that you're interested in, and an area that you're interested in exploring?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, Chris mentioned the word serendipity, which I think is this swift form pitch from randomness to serendipity. So trying to bring lucky randomness, if you like. And this fits very well with algorithmic composition. So rather than thinking on a particular sound, thinking on a space, musical space, or sound-based music space, and just defining that as subset. So, and free sound is so heterogeneous in terms of the variation you get from the different sounds, that when you put it into like a stage scenario, a music performance scenario, is very important to have a little bit of constraint and definition. But again, so it's like this serendipity helps to build more controlled space, but still getting the surprise, which is also very important. So still getting a surprising result, and that brings this agency, if you like, and also for the light footer, just having a relief in a way, because not having to code everything yourself, so leaving a little bit like the system to take some decisions for you.
Yeah, we have a little time for questions from the floor. If anybody has anything they'd like to ask the artist generally or individually.
I just wanted to ask about how you thought about following up on agency, how you think about personalities on stage. Like, I was thinking about the last set with Pierre and Owen, and if I had heard it on the radio, I might have thought there was only one musician. But like, maybe how many musicians, like, do you want a personality that's a separate personality to you on stage that's AI, or do you want it to augment you, or like, how do you think just about that dramaturgy of players?
You name me, so I'll defend myself first. I know it's not an attack. going back to the metaphor of improvising with another acoustic musician, everything that was said so far about feedback is true for acoustic instruments. The more you practice, the more you know the liminal space between the instrument and the world is fragile and porous, and exploring your virtuosity with the big V and removing all the romanticism of it becomes beautiful. And when you improvise with a group, I like to forget about those limits. So yeah, it's a compliment that you said it sounded like one person, because that's when one band, one sound, one person, one agent, moments where you have tensions between the protagonist and antagonist, moments where it's unity. Like in most music I like to listen, it's dynamic. And therefore, if I manage to go there with the computer, it means that we've had a good time. Now maybe Owen will disagree again.
I mean, I guess I might say there are a couple of strategies. I think George Lewis said either you hear somebody play something and you either play with them, or you play against them, or you ignore them.
And it's not my assessment of it being successful as a not performance, as a musicking environment, is the fact that it had all of that was possible. So cool. I've got a new agent setting musicking place where I can improvise with something that is, as contrary to what Owen said, not the worst improvisers that's played with. So.
What about you?
Simon has a question.
I was just gonna add to that. Like, as a lot of my laptop performance practice, not really so present in this set, but involves trying to control multiple layers of things, and usually being incapable of controlling them all at once. I mean, that's just an interesting challenge that any laptop performer is presented with. And it was nice to see Hannah's. I haven't seen any live coding in a while, and just the beautiful software architectures that allow you to spin off processes that you can leave to do their own thing, and you come back to them. And there's a nice sort of ambiguity about actually how many sounds we're hearing, whereas in DAW you're kind of looking at a strict number of tracks. But I think I'm still searching for that ideal of being able to do a performance where you can sort of set something up and trust it to interact with the other things that are going on. And I think that's one of the really interesting potentials of using AI or using any machine sort of adaptive system to set up these networks of interaction where they really, there's the reference point of a human performer in a band that you can think about, but you can also think in much more abstract dynamical systems, language, about those processes and achieving a sense of coherence through loosely coupled systems and so on, which we really worked on doing in that performance.
Simon, one final question.
Thank you. That was a really great, stimulating concert, and my question comes from the performances. AI or systems, it applies to both. I'm interested in what I've always thought of in a bit binary sense, but your performances made me think more subtly about it. The relationship between reaching out to the prosthetic aspect of systems against the invasion, the possibility of invasive aspects of systems. And actually, Georgina Vaughan's mentioned this in recent talks. To what extent, AI and other systems have the possibility to do damaging things to what you're doing, things that you don't. You are assuming your agency is going to triumph in this environment, in this relationship. I'm asking you, give me some thoughts on that relationship, prosthesis against invasion.
I also have opinions about this. Okay, so the big headline about that question for me and this situation is that doing this sort of stuff that we've all done from very different angles isn't just using a thing that's prefigured, but it's a practical demonstration that there are alternative ways of configuring it, right? So part of the problem with the current AI hype is that it just makes us think as with the economy, there is no alternative. It has to be about mass surveillance-based systems and massively invasive forms of universalism and horrible, harmful assumptions that spread out. But actually, all of these things are ways of working with what is now a 70-year legacy of very different technologies that show that we can wriggle our way through this space in very different ways, and it doesn't actually have to reproduce any necessarily of those nasty things. Actually turning that into effective political organisation is, that's a whole other battle. But I think one of the reasons that computational arts like this have at least the potential for social value is it's a place to start having that argument. Like, Google is not our destiny.
Bravo, music room.
And to agree with my colleague and give it a specific example where the narrative of the monoblock of AI as sales pitch hits reality. Those of you who are musicians with computers will have heard that Isotope is now AI powered to do mastering. And then you hear that and you say, okay, mastering engineer will run out of jobs. And then you listen, it's an algorithm that regressed to the mean. So obviously, you put anything in there, it will sound like everything else. And every single movie, like video promotion they put with a proper golden ear mastering engineer, they said, oh yeah, it's a good starting point. And then he turns off 3/4 of it and tweaks, or she go around and tweak. So the boring bits, the regression to going to a basal boring bit is easier in these monoblock because that's what they do. But that's what you've heard. You haven't heard any kind of fake film emotional music today. Like if you compose generic music that is about reification of the big block, you might run into trouble. But if you do anything creative, and humans are quite good at this, I have absolutely all hopes that it's just a tool. And don't forget, we have the master fader. Like if Owen was not happy with the thing, he just shut it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that, and I spoke about this a couple of years ago during lockdown when I wasn't sleeping. But I agree that music is a brilliant place to explore these. Like I think that performance is such an important space to kind of know these algorithms, to kind of smash the hype, if you like, and to create a space for exploration for sort of other ways of being, because it is really scary. Everyone talks about there are these sort of hype cycles of AI, right? We have them in the 70s, we have them in the 80s, we have them in the 90s. Lots of people say we're going to another kind of AI winter, and meanwhile there are things being controlled, and there are really shit decisions being made, and all sorts of really, really problematic issues. But it does feel, personally for me, I think things like Flucoma are so important for education because you realise, like we said, how stupid it is, how AI is just some maths, right? And the AI that we're afraid of that might be is that plus stupidity plus hype plus bad political structures. And so yes, it amplifies political problems. It demonstrates and reveals problems in law, but I think it can also generate diversity and kind of create ways out, within music practice, I think it's an amazing space to explore those alternatives, but just amplifying what Owen said, and such an important place for education as well.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, so the artistic, using artistic methods to explore the limits, the goods and the bads. I mean, being critical, this helps us to, thinking out of the box and seeing it differently and then informing. So that's the perfect space, and hopefully today we've seen different ways of exploring that, and they need us, right? To have this critical voice.
Watch out, Google.
Well, winter has fallen on this event, I'm afraid, because we have to leave the space. But I just want to thank all of our musicians, Feedback Cell, Eldridge, Chris Kiefer with Ollie Bown tonight, Anna Xambó, and then Pierre, Alexandre, Tremblay, and Owen Green. Just to say again that this is the first of two evenings on under the theme of performing critical AI. The second event is at Eclectic on Tuesday, 29th. That starts at 7:30 and features Erin Einbond, Xenia Pestovia, Artemi Maria Gotti, Maxime Echardor, and will be also very interesting, so please come to that as well. Thank you, everyone.